He slept by my side every single night, his breathing a heavy, rhythmic counterpoint to my silent tears. In the darkness I would pray, a desperate, endless plea to any power that might be listening, that my daughter would never discover the horrors that unfolded when the doors were locked and the outside world ceased to exist. But fate has a cruel sense of irony. In the end, it was she who betrayed me in the most devastating way imaginable. Hello, my name is Lucia. I am 75 years old today, and I am going to share a story I never thought I'd have the courage to tell. Before I begin, I'd like to ask you, whoever is watching this right now, to please leave a like on this video, subscribe to my channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Your support means everything and helps me continue to share these pieces of my life with you. This story begins in 1969, when I was 34 years old. It might sound strange to you today, but back then, a woman of 34 was already considered to be well into her life, especially if she was the mother of a teenager as I was. My daughter Mariana was 14, a beautiful, intelligent girl with what seemed like a brilliant future ahead of her. She had my same warm brown eyes, but her smile was all her father's, Ricardo, a smile I had learned to fear over the years. We lived in a small town in the interior of Minas Gerais, one of those places where everyone knows everyone else's business, and secrets are carefully hidden behind polite smiles at Sunday Mass. On the surface, we were the perfect family. Ricardo was a respected man. He worked at the town's bank and wore a suit and tie every day. I took care of our home and did some sewing work for the local ladies. Mariana was one of the best students in her school. She played the piano at church events and was dating the pharmacist's son, a nice boy approved by all the parents. But inside our home the story was completely different. Ricardo had started drinking in our first year of marriage. First, it was only on weekends. Then it became almost a daily ritual. He would come home reeking of cachaca, his eyes bloodshot, his tie hanging loose around his neck. In the early years, he would only yell, break things, and humiliate me with his words. "You're good for nothing, Lucia," he would sneer. "Look at this house, look at this food. You can't even get this right." I endured it all in silence. In those days, in 1969, a separated woman was seen as a failure, a disgrace to her family. My own mother used to tell me, "Marriage is like that, my dear. Men have strong tempers. We women must learn to endure." And endure I did, swallowing my tears, hiding the purple bruises on my arms with long sleeves when his words finally turned to actions. Mariana grew up in this environment. I tried to protect her as best I could. I would send her to sleep over at friends' houses when I sensed Ricardo was in a particularly foul mood. I invented excuses for the bruises. I walked into the corner of the table, darling. I slipped in the bathroom. It's nothing, just an allergic reaction. But children perceive things, don't they? Even without fully understanding, she knew something was terribly wrong. The situation worsened gradually, like water coming slowly to a boil. You know how it is. You put a frog in cold water and heat it up so slowly it doesn't realize it's dying until it's too late. That was my life for nearly 15 years. Each day was just a little worse than the last, but never different enough to give me the courage to grab my daughter and run. Until that one night. I will never forget it. June 17, 1969, a Tuesday. It was pouring rain, one of those heavy winter storms that turns the afternoon pitch black. Ricardo came home soaked and furious. He had been passed over for a promotion at the bank. Before the door even closed behind him, the shouting began. He threw his briefcase on the table, knocking over a vase my mother had given me. It shattered into 1,000 pieces, much like my life would that night. Mariana was in the living room, doing her math homework. She looked up, terrified, as her father stormed in. "Go to your room," I whispered to her. But Ricardo saw me, and it only enraged him further. "She stays right where she is," he bellowed. "It's high time she learned what real life is like, not this fantasy world her mother lives in." It was the first time he did it in front of our daughter. The slaps, the shoves, the vile names he called me, things no 14-year-old girl should ever hear said to her own mother. When I tried to defend myself, he shoved me against the wall with such force the air left my lungs. Mariana began to cry, begging him to stop. It was then that Ricardo turned to her, his eyes bloodshot, and said something that froze the very blood in my veins. "Stop your crying, you spoiled brat. One of these days I'll show you what it means to be a real woman, since your mother clearly can't." In that moment something inside me shattered, and yet, simultaneously, something else grew stronger than ever before. It was as if all the invisible chains that had bound me to that life were severed at once. This was no longer about me, about what I could endure. It was about my daughter, and what I would absolutely not allow to happen to her. I waited for Ricardo to fall into a drunken stupor, as he always did. I took Mariana, who was still trembling from the ordeal, and whispered, "Pack a small bag, just the essentials. We are leaving tonight." Her eyes widened in shock. "Where are we going, mother?" "To Sao Paulo. Your Aunt Carmen will take us in until we find our own place." You should have seen her face. It was as if I'd slapped her. "I can't leave. What about my school? My friends? What about Paulo?" Paulo was her young boyfriend, the pharmacist's son. First love, you know how it is. "Mariana," I said, holding her trembling hands in my own, which were shaking just as badly. "We leave now, or I don't know what might happen next time." She cried silently as she packed her bag. She took a photo with her friends, her diary, a few changes of clothes. She left behind her childhood teddy bear. "I'm too old for this now," she said, but I saw how her eyes lingered on it. That night marked the end of her childhood in so many ways. We left the house at 3 a.m., with a little money I had managed to hide away over the years. My emergency fund, which I had prayed I would never need to use. We caught the first bus to Sao Paulo at 5 a.m. I remember Mariana sitting beside me, staring out the window as our town faded into the morning mist. She didn't speak a single word during the entire 8-hour journey, but her silent tears never stopped flowing. When the bus finally pulled into the station in Sao Paulo, she turned to me with a look I will never forget, a mixture of pain, anger, and accusation that pierced my soul like a knife. "You've ruined my life," she said, each word slow and heavy with resentment. "Everything I knew, my friends, my boyfriend, my school. It's all gone because of you." Those words were branded onto my heart like a red-hot iron. I tried to explain that it was for her own good, to protect us. But how do you explain that to a 14-year-old girl whose world has just been turned upside down? To her, I wasn't a heroine saving her from danger. I was the villain who had ripped away everything she loved. And so began our new life in Sao Paulo, carrying not only the few suitcases we had brought, but also the heavy weight of that resentment. Unbeknownst to me, it would fester silently like a cancer in the years to come, until it finally exploded in the worst way possible. Those first months in Sao Paulo were like living in a different world. We had come from a small town where the loudest noise was the church bell ringing at 6 p.m., to a metropolis that never slept, filled with the blaring of horns, wailing sirens, and the constant rumble of buses. Everything was too big, too fast, too frightening. My sister Carmen welcomed us with open arms, but her apartment was tiny, just one bedroom and a combined living room and kitchen in an old building in Bras. We improvised a mattress on the floor for the two of us. "It's only temporary," I would say every night before bed, more to convince myself than to comfort her. She would just turn away, pretending not to hear. We woke at 5 a.m. in the dark. I would prepare a quick coffee while Mariana got ready for her new school, a public school vastly different from the convent school she had attended back home. "The girls here are different, mother," she told me after the first week. "They talk about things I didn't even know existed." The light in her eyes, the one I knew so well, seemed to have gone out. While she was at school, I took 2 buses to get to the sewing factory where Carmen had secured a job for me. I will never forget the deafening roar of the industrial machines, the smell of new fabric mixed with sweat, the cotton dust that clung to the back of my throat. I sat from 7 a.m. on a hard chair alongside 20 other women, each of us bent over our sewing machines. We worked until 6 p.m., with only a half-hour break for lunch. My hands, which had once sewn delicate dresses for the church ladies, now stitched hundreds of identical garments every day. My fingers would often bleed when the needle slipped. There was no time to tend to the pain. The supervisor watched the clock, counting the number of pieces each of us completed every hour. "Faster, Lucia," he would say, passing behind me. "There's a line of women waiting for your spot." The pay was meager, but combined with the small help Carmen provided, it was enough to survive. Slowly, I saved enough money to rent a small back room in a family house in Belenzinho. It was tiny with a minuscule bathroom, but it was ours. The first place we could call home since we fled in the middle of the night. Mariana remained distant. She did what I asked, went to school, helped with chores, studied when I insisted, but an invisible wall had grown between us. Sometimes near her birthday or at Christmas, I would catch her crying softly, looking at the one photo she had brought of her friends. "They're just memories," I would say, trying to comfort her. "We need to look forward." "What future?" she retorted once, her eyes hard with the cynicism of someone who had grown up too fast. "Sewing until my fingers fall off like you." That hurt more than any slap from Ricardo, because deep down, there was a grain of truth I couldn't deny. What future was I really offering my daughter? A life of hardship, of backbreaking work, far from everything she had known and loved. The months turned into years. 1970, 1971. Time passed without mercy. Mariana was growing up. She was no longer that 14-year-old girl. At 17, she was finishing school and working part-time at a stationery store near our room. She had made a few friends, had adapted to life in the big city, but that initial resentment never truly disappeared. It merely transformed into something quieter, more calculated. It was in mid-1972 that things began to change again. After 3 years of daily struggle, I was promoted to supervisor at the factory. The pay improved slightly, and so did the working conditions. I no longer had to sew for 10 hours a day. Now I coordinated the work of the other seamstresses, checked the quality of the garments, and managed production. It was there that I met Andre. He had just been hired as the new administrative manager. A man nearing 40, a widower with no children, always impeccably dressed, polite, with a calm way of speaking that reminded me of Ricardo in the very beginning, before the drink turned him into a monster. Andre began spending more time in the production area, always with some excuse to come talk to me. "Dona Lucia, we need to review these numbers." "Dona Lucia, could you help me with the quality report?" The other women at the factory soon noticed and began to tease me. "Look, Lucia, the boss can't take his eyes off you." I would blush and change the subject. At 37, after a failed marriage and 3 years of struggle, romance was the last thing on my mind. Besides, I had Mariana to consider. She wasn't a child anymore, but she still needed me, still depended on me financially while she finished her studies. Yet, when Andre asked me out for coffee after work one day, I found I couldn't refuse. It was just an innocent coffee at the diner across from the factory. We talked about work, about life in Sao Paulo. He told me he was from the interior of Parana and had come to the capital after his wife died of pneumonia. "I know what it's like to start over from nothing," he said, holding his cup with hands that seemed unused to hard labor. "You think you'll never make it, that the pain is too great, but then one day you wake up and realize you've survived another day, and then another and another." Something in his words touched my heart in a way I hadn't felt in years. For the first time it seemed someone truly saw me, not as the seamstress, the single mother, the woman who fled her husband, but as Lucia, just Lucia. The coffees became a weekly habit. Then came Sunday lunches, walks in the park. Andre was kind, attentive, and patient. He never raised his voice, never showed impatience, never made me feel less than. He brought small gifts, a book, some chocolate, a single flower. Simple gestures that began to rebuild the trust Ricardo had shattered. I told Mariana about Andre after we had been seeing each other for almost 2 months. She looked at me for a long time with an expression I couldn't decipher. "Do you really like him, mother?" she finally asked. I do, I replied, feeling my face grow warm like a teenager's. He's good to me. She just shrugged and turned her attention back to her notebook. Just be careful. Men are all the same in the end. That response worried me. It was so cynical for someone so young. I realized the wounds left by Ricardo weren't mine alone. Mariana carried scars too, some I didn't even know about. Perhaps her bitterness wasn't just about the move, the loss of her friends and her old life. Perhaps it was something deeper, a fear that looked far too much like my own.